Today's field trip, we are at the Vortex Trail, which is in the Dameron Valley outside of Gunlock, Utah. This is another one I don't really know very well, but it looks like an interesting spot. We've got some of this, a lot of volcanic rock here. We've got some of this sandstone, like what you would see in Zion. And the vegetation overall is kind of an interesting mix of higher elevation, Great Basin, kind of pinyon juniper, and big sagebrush mixed with some more Mojave kinds of plants like desert almond. So should be a fun mix. Okay, so we just crossed through this little creek here and seeing quite a few familiar things that we've encountered before. So we've got Utah juniper, we've got pinyon pine here, which I believe we've talked. Actually, have we talked about pinyon pine for this class? Maybe not. I'll talk about it later. We've also got our Dixie live oak and black brush. So like I was saying, it's kind of an interesting mix of Great Basin and Mojave habitats here. So this shrub is one we have not encountered before. This is a manzanita. And there's a couple manzanita species in our area. This one looks like point leaf manzanita, which would be Arctostaphylos pungens. That's the Latin name. Manzanitas you can recognize by the reddish bark and the just really smooth look to the bark. It's just very distinctive. There's not really anything else around here that looks like that. There's lots of manzanitas in California in the chaparral vegetation or the Mediterranean climate vegetation in California, but we've just got a couple here. So this is the lower elevation one, Arctostaphylos pungens. And a couple things that are really distinctive about it. So notice the way the leaves are oriented more or less, like rather than sort of laying flat relative to the sun, they're oriented more or less kind of straight up and down like this. So that's pretty common in manzanitas. And then the flowers. So this one's, the flowers are a little bit past, but I'll try to find a few that are still kind of hanging on here. So you see how the flowers have this kind of like an upside down urn shape to them. So you call that an ursulate flower. That would be the botanical term for that. Basically what we're looking at here is 5 petals that are fused into this bell shape. And that's very characteristic of the family, which is the Ericaceae, which is the heather family. So other things that are in the Ericaceae besides manzanitas would be huckleberries, blueberries, cranberries, rhododendrons, things like that. So they don't all have this bell-shaped flower, but it is really common in the family. And then the fruits when they mature, so here we've got some fruits that are just getting started, and they're just a little berry. And I guess some people thought they were kind of reminiscent of an apple, because manzanita means little apple in Spanish. So that's where the name comes from, the fruit there. So I wanted to talk about the pines here. So these are pinyon pines, and there are 2 pinyon pines around our area. So the one around Cedar City is 2-needle pinyon pine, which is Pinus edulis. This one is the other pinyon pine species. So this is single leaf pinyon, which is Pinus monophylla, right? So Pinus monophylla literally means pine with 1 leaf. So single leaf pinyon. So pinyon pines in general, right? 2-needle pinyon and single leaf pinyon, they look pretty similar. They're both shorter pine trees. They don't reach quite as great of a stature as something like a ponderosa pine or a lodgepole pine. Both of these species in our area, they're kind of ecologically, they sort of replace each other in different areas. So single leaf pinyon is the one that you tend to find more commonly to the west of Cedar City out in the Great Basin. So out through Nevada, this is the more common one. 2-needle pinyon is basically from Cedar City eastward into the Colorado Plateau. Okay, so Pinus monophylla. So remember from the campus walk when we talked about pines, one of the characteristics of a pine is that the needles are in these bundles or fascicles, right? And so two needle pinion, that's the best way to tell your pinyon pines apart from each other. So two needle pinion has 2 needles per fascicle, per bundle, and single leaf just has 1. So you could, looking at this with the 1 needle per bundle, that could almost look like a spruce or something like that. But if you can find cones, it's pretty easy to tell that you're not looking at a spruce, right? The cones are much woodier. In a spruce, the cones are narrower and the scales are really papery. In a pine, the scales are pretty thick and woody. So this is a cone that fell off the tree before really maturing. So when it's mature, the scales will kind of pull back to release the seed. So this was one that fell off before its time. All right. So that's single leaf pinyon. Here's another new plant for us, just right near the pinyon pine. So these low shrubs here, these are in the rose family, and the genus is Persia. These are bitterbrush. So I believe I've talked about Persia stansberryana, which is Mexican cliff rose, with you guys before. So this is the other Persia that we'll have commonly in our area, and they look pretty similar, but there's a couple easy ways to tell cliff rose and bitterbrush apart. So antelope bitterbrush is a ecologically really important species throughout lots of areas in Western North America. So again, it's in the rose family, and unfortunately we are a little early for flowers, so you can see these flower buds that are almost ready to open up. So when they open, they'll have 5-petaled flowers, 5 free petals, not fused together, and lots of stamens and a few carpels that are separate from each other, right? So remember the different parts of a flower that we talked about. But the way to recognize bitterbrush, so it's got these rose family flowers that are very typical. But the characteristic, if you look at the leaves, they actually look quite a bit like the leaves of a big sagebrush, even though they're not closely related. They're not in the same family. But you've got this same kind of it almost looks like a mitten to me or something, where the blade of the leaf tapers down, but there isn't really a sharp distinction between the leaf blade and the leaf stalk or petiole. And then you've got these 3 toothy lobes at the tip of the leaf, and that looks just like big sagebrush, right? Versus cliff rose has a similar leaf, like these really small leaves, but they usually have 5 to 7 lobes on them, and they have this white, crusty, kind of waxy secretion on them, and you don't see that on bitterbrush. Instead, bitterbrush has these fuzzy hairs all over it, so it gives it kind of this fuzzy look. So that's Persia tridentata bitterbrush, or something's called antelope bitterbrush, because I think it makes pretty good forage. Just a little commentary here. I mean, this is a new trail for me, and I just wanted to mention that Utah just never ceases to amaze. If this were Connecticut, this would be a national park for sure. But in Utah, it's just like a cool little spot that few people know about. This is an amazing place. So I just wanted to show you guys. Here's I guess we'd say this is bitterbrush, but with the flowers. Here's some flowers kind of closer up. Although I have to say what I'm seeing here is strongly suggestive of gene flow between these species. In other words, these species seem to be mixing, and I know they can do this. Bitterbrush and Mexican cliff rose can hybridize with each other. So when you look at these, you can see some of the leaves are much more bitterbrush looking. So you've got those leaves with basically 3 lobes, and they're a little bit fuzzier. And then right next to them on the same branch, you've got leaves with those little white waxy secretions, and they're smaller, like this one here. So there's even a name given to hybrids of these 2 species. They call it Persia glandulosa. I don't think that's an officially recognized species. So I think we've got both of them here, and it looks like they are swapping genes with each other. But I mainly just wanted to point out the flowers with the yellow, kind of pale yellow, 5 free pale yellow petals and the lots of these yellow stamens. So those are very rosaceae, rose family looking flowers. Okay, I want to talk about prickly pears for a second. So remember that prickly pears are they're cacti, right? And they're in this Opuntioid subfamily, the Opuntioideae. And so this is one that we have seen before. This is Opuntia polyacantha. Polyacantha means many spines, and that's reflected by just how you can see it's pretty well covered in spines. So this is pretty similar to the old man prickly pear that we saw when we went to the Beaver Dam Mountains the first week that we went out. And so notice, for scale, that's my hand. I don't want to get too close, but so there, it's kind of a smaller prickly pear. And then right over here, we've got another one, different species. And so you can see when you look at them right one after the other. My phone ran out of storage. It stopped me right in mid video. So this is a different species, right? So a bit larger, and you can see that the spots where the spines come out, so those are called areoles on cacti, and the areoles are much more widely spaced on this species. So this is Opuntia phaeacantha, which is brown-spined prickly pear, or sometimes it's called plains prickly pear. So the pads are larger, the areoles are more widely spaced, and notice how it grows kind of more laterally, like the new pads. They tend to just kind of trail on the ground and kind of grow out. And you'll find them growing in big kind of clumps like this. So we're in this cool slick rock area, and here is a new one that we have not encountered previously. So this is a mountain mahogany. So this is a genus of shrubs in the rose family. There are 3 mountain mahogany species in our area. So there is curl leaf, alder leaf, and little leaf mountain mahogany, and this is little leaf. And I often find this one growing kind of in these little just crevices in slick rock types of areas. So you can recognize it by, it looks quite a bit like blackbrush actually, and it's even in the same family. Those are both things in the rose family. But whereas blackbrush has opposite leaf phyllotaxy, right? Opposite attachment. This one's got alternate leaf phyllotaxy. So that's one good way to tell them right off the bat. Also, the bark is just a lot lighter of a gray color on this one, on the little leaf mountain mahogany. And we've got flowers here, which is fun. So let me zoom in on some flowers. Where am I? There we go. So the flowers in this one, they're actually apetalous, so they're lacking petals. So what you're looking at there are 5 sepals, between 4 and 5. Seems kind of variable on this one. And then you've got, so it's the inner wall of the sepals, kind of like in blackbrush actually, that is attracting pollinators. So they're kind of got this pinkish, yellowish cream color to them. And then the anthers are have that pronounced dark red color to them. So those are the anthers, right? The parts of the stamens that are producing pollen. And then you've got the one carpel in the middle with the style and stigma right there. So this is little leaf mountain mahogany in the rose family. And I forgot to give the Latin name in case you want it. So this one is Cercocarpus. So mountain mahoganies are Cercocarpus, and little leaf mountain mahogany is Cercocarpus intricatus. So this is really interesting, right? We've got this slick rock habitat, and all through here, you've got these little depressions, like over here, where little depressions where sand accumulates, and then you've got a bunch of vegetation kind of growing in these little spots where just a little bit of soil is all that's needed, right? So places like this, where it's mostly rock and then just a little bit of shallow soil. And so over here, though, we've got this zone that's a little bit more heavily vegetated, a little bit more soil development. And here under a Dixie live oak, there's a couple things that I wanted to talk about. There's actually quite a few things right here. So here's one. So see these yellow flowers? So this plant actually goes all the way back there. So we've got simple leaves with teeth on them, kind of coarsely toothed, simple leaves. These yellow flowers with 4 petals in an X or H shape arrangement, right? 4 free petals. And then if we look closely, what we'll find is 6 stamens in a 4 long, 2 short arrangement. Right, so you see that there? So that is in the mustard family, Brassicaceae. So the 4 free petals in a cross shape and 6 stamens, 4 long, 2 short, that's Brassicaceae. There's nothing else really that it could be. There's another one over there. So this is western wallflower, Erysimum capitatum, in the Brassicaceae. And the Brassicaceae is one of our really easy to recognize families, kind of once you get the hang of what it looks like. There's another thing right here, right next to it, that's also kind of interesting. So the flowers are just about to pop. So you can see those flower buds, not quite opened up yet. So this plant is, it's actually a parasite. It's a hemiparasite, kind of like our paintbrush, right? So it does its own photosynthesis, but the roots are little vampires that tap into the root systems of neighboring plants. So this plant is, the Latin name is Comandra umbellata, and the common name is bastard toadflax, which I think is pretty funny. It's like, you bastard. I guess, I don't know why it's called that, but there's another plant called toadflax, and so it's kind of like calling it false toadflax, but that's the name. So, and then the other one that I wanted to point out, so over here, so we met the Boraginaceae, the forget-me-not family, last week with Fremont's Phacelia. So this is another thing in the Boraginaceae, and the characteristics to recognize that family. So this is a Cryptantha, which is cat's eyes is the genus, and I'm not sure of the species, but it's just this little Cryptantha. But to recognize Boraginaceae, one of the clues is that the plant is covered all over, like leaf stems, even the flowers themselves, the sepals of the flowers are covered in these little simple needle-like hairs. They're not needle-like in the sense that they'll poke you. They're kind of long and relatively long and simple hairs. And then the inflorescence, right? I kind of mentioned this before with the Fremont's Phacelia. It has what's called a scorpioid inflorescence, which just means that the inflorescence kind of curls around like a scorpion's tail. So the older flowers, they're kind of coming out like this. So the older flowers are here, and then newer flowers kind of coming out to the side, so that the flower buds kind of curl under, and the whole inflorescence kind of has this curled over look to it. And then the flowers themselves, the petals, you've got 5 petals that are fused. So they look kind of free here, but we're just looking at the end of the petal. It makes a little tube underneath there. So they're fused together into a tube. And then commonly in this family, in the Boraginaceae, at the top of the tube where the petals flare outward, you'll get a ring of little appendages. I don't know how well you can see it here, but there's a little ring of appendages, and that ring is often a different color than the rest of the petals, right? So see how the petals are white, and that little ring is yellow. Not always a different color, but just that the presence of that little ring at the top of the flower tube is kind of a good hint. So those things all together spell Boraginaceae, forget-me-not family. And I think that's everything I wanted to talk about under here. Here's another shrub that I've been seeing around quite a bit. It's incredibly common in our area. Haven't talked about it yet because it hasn't been flowering, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about this one. So this is Utah serviceberry, and we can recognize it by the shape of the leaves, these really oval leaves, just like a few teeth on the very end of the leaf there. See that? It's kind of a light green oval leaf, and notice how the shoots that the leaves flush from, it's also got this what we call short shoot architecture, where there are shoots that elongate quite a bit from year to year, these kind of main shoots, and then these little side shoots that just elongate a little bit every year, and their job mainly is to just produce leaves quickly. And this is a really common architectural strategy in desert environments, right? Being able to just kind of flush leaves quickly without having to invest a lot in a lot of stem tissue. All right, so there's no flowers yet on this one, But we do have fruits from last year. So this plant, serviceberry, is also in the rose family, just like our bitterbrush and our mountain mahogany, right? So a lot of our woody shrubs around here are either in the rose family or the sunflower family. And these are the fruits from last year. And they're, whoops, there, just fell off. Here's another one. If we look at them, so serviceberry is actually pretty closely related to apple. So these berries are basically just like a little tiny apple. Remember how we mentioned manzanita, that means little apple in Spanish, but this one actually is kind of a little apple because it's closely related to apple. It's in the same grouping within the rose family. And so notice how, you ever notice on an apple how you got that 5-pointed star on the end of the apple? So those are the persistent sepals, and we have the same thing here. Let me zoom in a little bit. So that 5-pointed star is one of the key characteristics of the apple subgroup. Okay. It's not really fleshy like an apple, but the fruits are edible when they're ripe. These are last year's fruits, so they're all dried up, but they are edible. And then the flowers when they come out, so I actually spotted some on the road up here, so maybe I'll pull over on the way out from this trail. So the flowers have 5 white free petals, which is very rosaceae kind of a characteristic. And the name serviceberry, the story, which is probably not true but still a good story anyway, is that the name serviceberry is because so basically with pioneers, when people died over the winter, they would have to wait until the summer to bury people. And those were the flowers they used in the spring when the ground thawed enough to bury the dead. That was when the serviceberries were blooming, and so they would use those flowers for funeral services. That's actually turns out not to be true, but it's a good story. The name probably comes from the genus Sorbus, which is also in the rose family, that it sort of resembles, but not really. So, but I like the story, so I want to pass it on. Right next to our serviceberry here, we've got this juniper, and I want to point this out. So this juniper is being parasitized by a mistletoe. So you can see the mistletoe. Notice how it looks pretty similar actually to the juniper, the way it branches. So it's got opposite branching, just like the juniper does, right? The leaves in the juniper are opposite each other, and the juniper leaves are really reduced in scale-like, and that's also true of the mistletoe. So that's kind of interesting. So mistletoes are parasites, right? It's the same mistletoe that we talk about at Christmas. And so this is juniper mistletoe, Phoradendron juniperinum. And I don't see any berries here, which is too bad, because a cool thing about the mistletoes, right? So these are parasites. Their roots tap into, rather than being in the ground, the roots tap into their host directly on the branch. But they are hemiparasites because they are photosynthetic. That green color tells you there's photosynthesis going on here. And the berries are very, very sticky inside. Like if you take the berry, if you break it, it's very gooey and sticky. And basically what happens is when birds eat the berries, so birds like the berries, and more likely than not, it's a bird that likes to hang out in juniper branches. So it'll eat the berry and then it'll fly to another juniper, and it will either cough the seed up or excrete it, poop it out. And that seed, it's so sticky, it's so gummy that it'll just stick to the branch where it was dropped, and it can germinate there on the branch, right on its same host, right? So most mistletoes are pretty host specific. So that's a way, those sticky seeds is a way to move, right, to disperse the seeds and specifically onto the host that you need. So pretty clever. These little pink flowered plants growing down here, kind of in the shade of this oak. These are a phlox. This is longleaf phlox. There are quite a few phlox species in our area, and I recognize this one because phlox tend to grow with this really compact, kind of cushiony, mat forming kind of growth habit. And of any of the maybe 3 or 4 species that are common in our area, longleaf phlox is the one that's the least kind of densely compacted in how it grows. Okay, phloxes have opposite leaf attachment, opposite phyllotaxy, and the flowers are, and let me just get one here. The flowers form a tube. let's see here. Okay, so you got this long floral tube. Do you see that? So there's the calyx, right? The green sepals, and then that tube coming up out of there. That's your fused petals, and then the 5 petals are, the lobes are separate at the top. And a good way to recognize phlox, because that floral tube is so narrow, so there's 5 sepals down inside there. That tube is so narrow that the sepals, the anthers of the sepals are all staggered, right? They're not all at the same height inside there. So they're fused to the inside of that corolla tube, and they're all staggered relative to each other. So give me a second. I'm going to go ahead and peel this corolla tube apart to show you. So here it is peeled in half. See, one of the halves, there's one of the anthers there, that yellow thing. Where's that 2 there? Yeah, there's 2 of them over on that side. See how they're a little bit staggered. And then over here we've got, on this other half, we've got 1, 2, 3 anthers. So just kind of a fun little thing to look for. That's pretty characteristic of phlox, the genus phlox. So here we are. This is a cool spot, kind of looking down this cliff into this little ravine. And right up here on this path, so we've got a nice example of the carrot parsley family. So talking about umbels before, right, with our buckwheats, these kind of fake umbels that they have. So things in this family, carrot parsley family is Apiaceae. The traditional name for it is umbellifery, which means umbel bearing. So this is what that umbel inflorescence looks like. So if you look underneath, basically what you've got is at the top point on the flower stalk, all these branches radiating out from a single point. Sorry, I'm sniffling because I've been hustling a little bit. And then each one of those branches, again, kind of explodes in a little star of flower clusters. So that's an umbel, right? All the branches attach at a single point of the inflorescence. And this is a characteristic of the umbellifery or Apiaceae or carrot parsley family. And this is, you see a lot of these around here. This is either a Cymopterus or a Lomatium. They're generally called spring parsley, and they're hard to tell apart. You really kind of need the fruits unless you know the group super, super well, which I'm learning, but I don't know it that well. So I'm just going to leave it at that, either Cymopterus or Lomatium, spring parsley in the carrot parsley family. And then the other thing that I neglected to mention on that last one, so this is the same species, so the leaves, right? The other way to kind of, recognize this family is the leaves. You typically have these leaves that are deeply dissected, like divided, oftentimes compound, so this would be a compound leaf, with each leaflet sort of deeply, deeply kind of lobed or divided, we would say, or dissected. So that's the other thing, right? Just think of like parsley or cilantro or something like that. Those are all in the same family, or carrot greens if you ever get carrots with the greens still on the top. Made it. Here I'm at the Vortex. I took a wrong turn. Explored this countryside a little more. Very, very cool. But here it is. Just another day in southern Utah.